Gyrish Nation, welcome to the first off-season episode. Today we're going to be discussing the roster, how it's changed, how it's evolved, who's in, who's out, portal news, and all of that. But Mike, welcome to the show. This is I should have asked this beforehand, our fourth season? Fourth? Fifth?
I think that's right. You know, it's funny. Like after a certain number of years, you kind of lose track. It reminds me of this friend I had from an old job. I think he was maybe 26 at the time, but he like clearly wasn't really like keeping track of the years. And someone was like, "How old are you?" And he's like, "I'm 23." And I'm like, "Dude, what are you talking about? You're 26." He's like, "Oh yeah." He's like, "Yeah, you're right, 26." So I don't know. It's. I'm feeling a little bit of that right now. I think you're right. I think it's 4, but we can go back and check.
All right, we'll check that for the analytics podcast. We're off on the first step. I think we got to treat this year like this is a contract year. You know, like this is up. Like our listeners, the boosters, like you know, we're on the hot seat. Like we got to know what year in the contract we're in, and so this is the year. Mike and I are going for a long-term extension. We're actually recently now part of a new podcast network, the College Huddle. Go check that out on X, YouTube, wherever you follow your podcast. They cover 100 different collections of podcasts across a bunch of schools. So excited for that. I think it'll be a great way for us to get more guests on the show to discuss opponents and kind of the inside scoop from the other fan base. But Mike, as we're getting in today's show, we're going to be talking a lot about recruits, new freshmen, transfers coming into the roster. You've also had a pretty big transfer into the portal in your family. Like, how's it going this summer?
Yeah, pretty wild change. So, had a baby daughter on June 17th, and that's my first child. Total whirlwind. I mean, I think I had done about as much prep as you could, like reading up on what it would be like, but nothing can really totally prepare you for it. Like even if you have a good idea of what it's going to be like, it's another thing altogether to actually experience it. So it's pretty much everything that people describe it as. It's a life-changing experience. Gives you a huge sense of self-fulfillment, exhausting, like, you know, you feel tremendous joy. So I mean, it's literally all of the above. And couldn't be happier. And newest member of the family, newest member of Gyrish Talk. She's, I guess you would say, she's the official baby of the Gyrish Talk podcast. I have some Notre Dame onesies and things that I'm gonna, and actually, like my wife and I were pretty smart about it. So we bought the sizes that that she was going to project out to be, during football season. So she doesn't fit into them now, but in a month or so, she should hopefully be fitting into these Notre Dame outfits. And
it's just like recruiting. You always got to project like, hey, what frame do you think they're really going to fill out into? You know, they project an offensive tackle guard. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Same thing. Got to project the onesies.
Exactly. Yeah. So I don't know if I'm going to be as good at projecting, as Notre Dame has been with certain position groups, but I think we have a pretty good idea. And I mean, it'll be great just getting her. She's going to have absolutely no idea what's going on for years with football, but I'll get her. Hopefully get her to be Notre Dame's newest, biggest fan. Obviously, looking forward to taking her to campus. Over the coming years, get the classic Notre Dame family photo. Me and my wife, who's also a Notre Dame grad, and our daughter in front of the Golden Dome. So. Just something that you got to do, something I'm looking forward to. But yeah, I mean, look, I am, like I said, total whirlwind, but I'm also very much looking forward to football season. That gives kind of, it's like, for me, it's always like, it's my happy place in the fall. It's kind of a sense of, I don't want to say stability, because sometimes these seasons can be pretty crazy, frankly. But it is a source of, entertainment and camaraderie. It helps like rally our friendships together. So I'm very much looking forward to that. And I told Brett before this, I have a carve out for the Notre Dame football season. So I'm on baby duty, when I get home from work, but for certain matters of Gyrish Talk and certain matters of Notre Dame football, I get a little leeway there too. So yeah, so that was my big change. And I mean, and I guess on top of that, I might have mentioned, I also got a new job too. So I used to work at Disney, which is why anytime Brett would say something bad about ESPN, I would be like, hey, you gotta settle down. Like that's you're insulting my employer there a little bit, but I no longer
know a fair game to go after Mickey Mouse. I am so excited.
Yeah, so I no longer. I mean, my wife still works at Disney, but I no longer work at Disney. So I would say the gloves are off a bit, and I still work in media, but no longer at Disney. I just work at what you'd call is maybe the largest fruit company ever conceived. That'll be my hint at which company I'm working at now. I guess media. I call them media. They're not really a media company. They just have media. So, anyways,
Well, you've had a way busier off season than I have, so maybe I'll save my off season updates, I guess, for a future show. But let's get into this one. We've got it structured a few different ways. We're first going to talk about departures, who left, who are we going to miss from last year's squad that took us to the national title game, who's in from the transfer portal, who's in by way of freshmen, and who's guys that were on the roster last year and you maybe didn't hear their name on an NBC broadcast, but would expect them to play a bigger role this year. So, Mike, let's start with departures and let's start on the offensive side of the ball. What position or player is impacted the most from your perspective? I think there's probably an obvious answer, and then
yeah.
after that, maybe a little harder to kind of splice through where else are we going to feel it the most.
Yeah, I mean, look, frankly, anytime you have an experienced, effective quarterback, one who got you to the national championship, you have someone like that departs, and then you have inexperienced players who are vying for the starting spot. The answer is that it has to be quarterback. And that's the case here. So Riley Leonard, yeah, got off to a little bit of a bumpy start last year at times, but certainly by the end of the year, well, maybe not like the most dynamic elite passer. He was overall an extremely effective offensive player for us. We had, if you look at Pro Football Focus, he was our second highest graded player on the team behind Jeremiah Love. So someone like that, tough to replace. I think, we'll talk about the guys who are going to be filling in behind him. CJ Carr, Kenny Minchie. I'm optimistic about those guys. I think they can be tremendous players, but I think anytime you have a first time starter, there's going to be some uncertainty. So I think clearly quarterback is the answer here. That's like really the obvious one for me.
Yeah, I mean, we plotted just total snaps played against Pro Football Focus grade. Obviously, snaps doesn't represent everything. Guys were out with injuries, etc. Pro Football Focus grades are subjective, but it gives you a sense of the quality of the play and the quantity of the play. And Riley Leonard played 150 snaps more than any other guy that departed from the offense and had a grade of 83.5, and Pat Coogan was next at 72. So, by far the biggest contributor. Again, if Mitch Evans would have been healthy, like Bo Collins, but it's such a clear choice there. I think the other way to look at this, though, is depth at offensive line is taking a really big hit. And, one of the things, and we can talk about this maybe more on our next show when we get into the offense, but it's so hard to keep depth at offensive line in the transfer portal because really offensive line and quarterback are the only two positions that don't rotate. So if you're the backup quarterback, you might not ever see the field if QB1 is healthy. If you're the sixth offensive lineman, you might not ever see the field if everyone else is healthy. Notre Dame had a unique situation last year where there were 9 offensive linemen that got a ton of time starting. Tosh Baker graduated, but 3 other guys, Pat Coogan, Rocco Spindler, and Sam Pendleton, all transferred out. And again, we'll discuss this more next week, because at the end of last season, the coaches said, look, here's our healthy best 5, and you guys are number 6 through 8. And so they took their services elsewhere to Tennessee, Nebraska, Indiana. Interestingly, all pretty darn good football programs, 2 that made the college football playoff last year where they'll be starting. So clearly high-end guys, but even there, Pat Coogan, grade of 72, Rocco Spindler, grade of 71, so solid starters. Sam Pendleton, grade of 63, pretty average. So it's a depth concern where I think you feel good about our offensive line. The coaches pick the 5 guys they want back, but that's 3 really, solid college football starters you're missing at one position group. And that one stood out to me.
Yeah, so I totally agree with you there, Brett. It's interesting, and we talked about this in our way too early show back in February. We called out, Pendleton, Spindler, Coogan, and we said, yeah, hey, look, they were not our top 5 guys going into the season, but that's 6 through 8. So if you have one guy go down, boom, it's already happened. Jagasaw's already hurt, not for the whole year, but we've already had one guy go down. But we were saying if we have people start to go down, that's where you start to feel the loss of depth a little bit. Now, look, thankfully, Jagasaw's not out for the year, but maybe half the year. So that certainly is impactful.
For sure. The
Eh,
one mitigant to both sides on offense that might not be there in every way we talk defense. Maybe this will be a good transition to the defense. We have blue chippers left and right. So as we get into new contributors, as we get into potential freshmen, I'm not suggesting any freshman will be playing on the offensive line to start the year. But as you look at the sophomores, the Gerby Lamberts, Absher Sullivan, guys that didn't get in the mix last year, but are high end recruits. We've recruited and developed so well at that position. It makes you feel pretty good. On defense, then, Mike, I mean, same question. I think this one also has a pretty obvious answer, but
Yep.
frankly, there's more choices maybe after the first answer. So I'm curious, who's the obvious pick that we're going to miss the
Yeah.
most? But then I think there's probably a pretty good debate about who's next on that list.
Yeah. I mean, look, I think it's, you know what I'm going to say. And so look, this guy was one of the best just players for Notre Dame in a very long time. And he was healthy for a lot of this year, which some of our better players on defense, like they would have been contenders for me to name them here. But unfortunately, they were hurt for a lot of the year. So it's not like we're actually losing that much production. So the person I'm going with is Xavier Watts, highest graded player on defense, 89.7, rounded up to 90. The only player who graded out better than him on the team was Jeremiah Love. So extremely productive, one of the best safeties Notre Dame has had in a long time, and that's saying a lot when you have people like Harrison Smith and Kyle Hamilton, in that room. So I think it's just with him, it's you lose a tremendous player, and I think we have a talented defensive back room, we have talented corners, but there's not a clear person to like fill in that spot who's going to be close to the talent level of Xavier Watts. I think Adon Schuler, I think he's poised to step up and be a big time player. But that second safety spot, I think we'll get solid play, but there's a drop off from all time Notre Dame great to maybe merely pretty good. And so to me that feels like the very obvious departure that we have to call out here.
Yeah, unlike on offense, and I think the other positions to talk about on defense, I think the safety position will have the biggest drop off this year from Watts to what's probably Luke Talich or the
Tay Johnson,
Virginia Tech, maybe Tay Johnson,
Yeah.
and then the Virginia Tech transfer, Jalen Stroman.
Yeah.
I think any of those three guys will be a clear drop off. It's, this show has heard me praise Ben Morrison as the like greatest cornerback I've ever watched play college football, but he only played 6 games last year.
Yeah.
And Leonard Moore, I think, is maybe looking like the second greatest cornerback I've ever seen. And Christian Gray had his ups and downs. We can talk about that more on the defensive preview show. Like those two guys balled out for a lot of the year, and we're put in a lot of man-to-man situations that, I think there's probably better ways to protect them this year, not leave them on an island so much. And then a lot of blue chip talent coming up in that cornerback room. Mike Mickens has done a great job recruiting there. So Ben Morrison, I kind of put in the similar bucket as the offensive line. Jack Kaiser, grade of 83, super solid starter. 13% missed tackle rate was just absolutely elite. He was the organizer of the defense. Like I think there's a strong case. Kaiser's in that bucket. But again, I look at the guys behind Kaiser, Drake Bone, Jalen Sneed, Jane Osbury, KVA. I think that might be our strongest position group on defense, maybe on either side of the ball outside of running back. Like clearly Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price are just a two-headed monster at running back. I think linebackers are next best position group despite losing Jack Kaiser. So that's for me what puts Xavier Watts in that level. I'm curious, same thing like Riley Mills, Howard Cross, but like they've been banged up so much. I'm curious what you think about the defensive line in that equation too.
Yeah, it's interesting. So yeah, I totally agree. I'll just reiterate this point like one last time on the safeties. I think this still could be a good room. I think it's a good room, but last year was a historically great room. And so that's kind of the drop off that we're talking about with safety. And you can mitigate it a bit with the corners playing really well. But yeah, I mean, Brett, in terms of the defensive line, it's interesting because guys like Riley Mills, Howard Cross, as you mentioned, banged up for major portions of the year. And if these guys were healthy the entire year, we know how impactful they are because we saw that drop off show itself, particularly in the Ohio State game. We were kind of able to get away with it for a while, but it really showed itself in the national championship. So if they were healthy all year, I think we'd be singing a bit of a different tune here. But because they were hurt, the silver lining is that a lot of guys got a lot of meaningful reps behind them. And there are a lot of guys who are who are hurt who are actually coming back. So Jordan Botelho, although unfortunately he got hurt yet again, but it sounds like he'll probably be healthy at some point this year. Boubacar Traore, that's another guy who, he's coming back from an injury. Potentially a big time player for us. And now these are guys on the edge, whereas like Mills and Cross are in the interior. But still, a lot of those guys who filled in on the interior, they got some meaningful reps as well. So I think for the defensive line, you're losing some big time players, but we had guys who got meaningful reps, because of that, and also because of the extended playoff. We have guys on the edge who would have been big time players for us who got hurt but are going to be back this year. So look, I guess overall, my sentiment is, despite those departures, it feels like the defensive line could be better than it was last year, which is, I think that's saying a lot, just given the level, the profile of players that we had departing.
Yeah, I just looked this up while you're talking too. It's interesting that Riley Mills and Howard Cross had a pretty big production drop off. Now I say that Riley Mills had 8 sacks last year. I think people kind of lose sight of that. And I think they lost production because even when they were playing, they were battling through some injuries. They were never fully healthy. And again, Pro Football Focus grades are very subjective. But in 2023, Cross and Mills had Pro Football Focus grades of 90 and 81. Like, they were destructive forces on the inside. Last year, Cross had a grade of 71 and Mills had a grade of 72. So still solid college level starters, but they were not at that elite level. And it goes to show, because we were rotating 10 guys on the defensive line, we didn't really miss a beat. And this year, I counted them up, looking ahead to our defensive show here in a couple episodes. I think we're going to have 9 or 10 contributors again. And that's without Jordan Botelho, who's dealing with another big time bummer, but another injury with his pec muscle that he tore, also similar to Jagger. So it looks like he's probably out half the year, but
Mid-year,
there's still going to be 9 or 10 guys rotating there that, despite the drop off in play, like if you would have told me Mills and Cross at the start of last year will take a 20-point drop and a 10-point drop in their Pro Football Focus grade, like, how's the defense going to do? And I would have said, oh man, like, that's going to be a long year. Yeah. And if you'd have said the same thing about Ben Morrison, how would have the defense fared? I said, oh man, we're going to have a long year. And we didn't, because of the rest of the contributors. So when we say Xavier Watts is the biggest departure, Riley Leonard is the biggest departure, I don't think that has anything to do with the other guys and how great Riley Mills, Ben Morrison, Howard Cross, and others were, Mitch Evans. I think it's just, who are you replacing them with? It's just a bigger drop off.
Yeah. The way I see it is, on the edge, I think we should have a meaningful uptick in the pass rush versus last year. And some of the reason that, as I mentioned, we didn't have as much of it last year was because of the injuries. And then just from a pure production spot on the interior, you mentioned these guys, like what they graded out as. A lot of that was probably, it was injuries. But if you look at who we have slotting in, like someone like Dawson, someone who should be a productive player for us, someone like Gabriel Rubio. Like, yeah, look, maybe their upside is not what Howard Cross and Riley Mills was. But if we look at what their actual production is going to be over the course of the year, like, I think it's pretty reasonable that it should probably, end up being about the same, maybe a little bit better if they can stay healthy. And so that's kind of what you're betting on here. And it's really like with those two guys, Cross and Mills, it's just missed upside last year that really just like dung us in the national championship. So projecting this, improvement for this year, I think it's all these factors project out well if you're trying to peg down where our defense is going to stack up.
Absolutely. Let's go to the transfer portal next. Notre Dame brings in I'd say solid but not game-changing haul. I think Notre Dame fans should probably expect, 1 or 2 starters on offense, 1 or 2 starters on defense, and probably a couple depth pieces on defense. Not going to, have a Jack Cohn or Sam Hartman or Riley Leonard, the face of the program as a transfer. Not going to have a Kane Madden, who came in as an All-American from Marshall, maybe never lived up to that All-American hype, but, was kind of viewed as a big-time transfer coming in. This is going to be more, I think, filling out the roster. And the main place to look here is, once again, just like last year, going after Bo Collins. The wide receiver room continues to be a question mark on this offense. I think there's reasons to believe it's better than it has been in prior years. Again, can get into that in the offensive show coming up here on the next episode. But Mike, Malachi Fields, Will Pauling, I think are the two biggest names coming in. What's the case that they can actually break through and not just be another 300, 400 yard guy, but actually break through that wide receiver room and actually put up, some stats where we're saying, holy cow, like Notre Dame can have 1,000-yard receiver this year. Like, what's the case for that to happen for those two guys?
Yeah. So Malachi Fields, I'll start with him because I think he's the one who has the greatest chance of doing that. So he was a productive player in the ACC at UVA, 2 seasons of 50 plus catches, 5 touchdowns, 800 plus yards. So that's meaningful production against a high level of competition. It's not G5 competition. And Brett, as you mentioned, some of these prior examples, mixed bag when we've brought in guys who've been productive against G5 competition. He's actually done it against good competition. And there's some important caveats to make here. So one, he was clearly the number 1 target at UVA. So if there was a target that they were going to throw to, it was him. Now, the downside of that was that also meant the defense would focus on him more. So you kind of get a little bit of both there. I think one other thing that could maybe point to some upside with him is that the quarterback play at UVA last season was pretty abysmal. So it's not like he was exactly, working with like an explosive offense, a dynamic QB who could get him the ball. I think another thing to note with Fields is big body player. I think the case for him, the upside scenario for me is that he looks like a Miles Boykin. And that's what some of the beat reporters have kind of been describing. They say he's a little bit bigger than Bo Collins. So far, he's looked good in camp, but I think it's one of those things where he's not a clear star. Like his transfer portal profile, it wasn't like he was like one of the top players to get in the portal overall. He's a solid wide receiver that is definitely going to increase the quality of our wide receiver room. And I think there's upside for him to be an impact player, but I don't think we can just assume it. I think a reasonable base case is he is a good player in the wide receiver room. And you hope that maybe he can kind of look a little bit more like that Miles Boykin. I think he's a guy who would be critical for us on like third downs, critical for these like 50-50 balls, kind of gives your quarterback, another tool in the arsenal to do that. So I think to answer your question, Brett, I think I would be surprised if he, lit the world on fire, but I think he should be a good player for us. And then for Pauling, I would say I'm less optimistic. I think he could be a solid player for us, but he's been a bit up and down. He had a strong year 2 seasons ago, and then last year there was a pretty big drop off in his play. And I think you got to call out Wisconsin, pretty big struggle on offense last year, so that probably limited him a little bit. But again, I think he's someone who could be a solid contributor in the room, but I would be surprised if he was a top 2 wide receiver for us. I think he's someone who's going to provide depth for us, but still like an improvement over some of the guys that we've lost in the transfer portal. So that's kind of how I view these guys as rounding out the wide receiver room. Maybe there's some bigger upside with Malachi Fields, but we'll have to see exactly how that manifests itself as the season goes on.
Yeah, and Pauling also, in addition to having, Brian Locke beat out Tommy Van Dyke at quarterback, Van Dyke coming over from Miami wasn't able to hold the job. Locke was just incredibly inaccurate, 55% completion percentage, almost as many interceptions as touchdowns. Like that was just a struggle of an offense. And so I think that's, certainly a big part of it. The other thing that I'd say though, is 2 years ago, Pauling had a Pro Football Focus grade of 77 and 834 yards receiving. Fields last year had 808 yards and a Pro Football Focus grade of 74. So like when you plot that out, pretty darn productive from a yardage perspective. And again, not light the world on fire Pro Football Focus grade, but that's a above average college football starter. Last year, the rest of Notre Dame's wide receiving group, if you just do that same plot, you had Jaden Greathouse grade out at that same level, but despite 2-3 extra games, didn't break 600 yards. Everyone else, Bo Collins was the second leading receiver and had a Pro Football Focus grade of 59. Jordan Faison had less than 400 yards receiving. Like Chris Mitchell and Jaden Harrison had a little over 200 yards receiving. Like no one else in that offense has a proven season in a Power Four conference schedule of both the quality and the like quantity of yardage output, overall offensive contribution as Fields and Pauling does. Now, Greathouse and a bunch of the other guys in that room, I think definitely are blue chip talent, probably higher recruits than Fields and Pauling. Like this doesn't stop me from thinking Jane Greathouse is our wide receiver number one this year, but feel pretty good about Fields and Pauling just having a proven full season campaign. Again, Pauling may be more questionable, like what happened last year. Doesn't excuse some of the drop issues he's had, but feeling pretty good about those two guys coming in.
Yeah. And so, I mean, for me, I feel like you combine the continued upward trajectory of guys like Greathouse and Faison with these two guys. And look, I think this is a receiver group that's clearly better than last year. Like, are they like a top 10 wide receiver unit? No. But I think it might actually be a good wide receiver unit, which we have not had. Like each of the last couple of years, there's been improvement. But granted, we were starting from an abysmal starting point. Like that wide receiver group a couple of years ago was awful. But then each year we've gotten a little bit better. And I think this is like finally a point where we could say that we actually have a good, serviceable group of wide receivers. And part of that is because these transfers should be productive. Not world beaters, not Heisman contenders, but solid players.
Absolutely. So same question, Mike, on defense. Who are the biggest contributors you're most excited about coming in from the portal?
Yeah, so I think for me, the safest bet from a productivity standpoint is Devontae Smith from Alabama. So solid player for Bama, played about 35 snaps a game. Didn't grade out spectacularly. He had a pretty high recruiting profile out of high school, top 200. I think Marcus Freeman may have actually, when he was at back in the day, may have actually been recruiting him. I saw some comment at a press conference where he was talking about that. So there's some pre-existing relationship there, which is also probably helped us get him. It also makes it easier to get guys when you're in the national championship. But for me, he's someone who maybe didn't grade out spectacularly at Alabama. He is tailor-made for our nickel role. And we've had a lot of success identifying players from other programs to transfer in and fill that nickel role. You could look at Jordan Clark last year. So for me, I feel like this is a guy who's just going to continue the success that we see in that nickel role, continue to contribute to a secondary that should perform at a very high level for us.
For sure. I think that's the right answer. I view it the same way. I mean, he played a ton for Bama. High potential recruit, like blue chip guy. I think there's a number of other options for second. You got Jared Dawson, you mentioned earlier, D lineman from Louisville, had 5 sacks last year. He's a 3-year contributor at Louisville, productive in all of those years, graded out as a Pro Football Focus 81. Again, subjective. You've got Elijah Hughes on the defensive line, similar level, probably graded out more poorly, but similar level of like snaps played at USC. I mentioned Jalen Stroman earlier at Virginia Tech, 2-year starter, although got injured and missed substantially all of last year. But if he can get back to form, was a very solid safety for them. Look, Dawson and Hughes are going to be rotation pieces. Probably, like Dawson will probably start, but those will be 2 among 8 to 10 guys rotating on the defensive line. Stroman, like to be determined if he's starting. That's where, to me, Devontae Smith's going to be the biggest impact guy. He will start at nickel. He will be the third guy out there, pending a big surprise coming out of summer camp. So I think that's for sure the obvious choice. All right, freshman. Look, with a team with as much talent as Notre Dame does, bringing back as much as we are, I think it's a great place for Marcus Freeman, where we may not have a true freshman play meaningful football this year. Now, I'm sure someone will surprise us. I'm sure someone will break through. But we might not see anyone contribute. Certainly not at quarterback. Certainly not at running back. And probably not on the offensive line. Like, you'd have to, I think, probably see 2-3 guys go down with injuries. Although we didn't see Anthony Knapp, on our radar last year until he really shined in summer camp. So it doesn't leave a ton of options. I think it's really kind of got to be tight end or wide receiver. Mike, who's likely going to step up? If we do see someone break into the rotation this year, what are the freshmen, 1 or 2 names people should have on their radar?
Yeah, and look, I'm gonna I'm gonna ignore the possibility of Will Black, our near 5-star offensive tackle commit, pulling what Knapp did last year. That doesn't seem like
And
that's in
by
the
the way,
cards.
he very easily could. Like
Could
he's
yeah,
he's a high end talent, right? Like he
yeah,
feels like the next Joe Walt, Blake Fisher, Anthony Knapp, like a guy that can step in and play. He
totally.
feels ready made.
Yeah, it's like when you look at his his size profile, it's honestly pretty terrifying, which is exactly what you want to see in your offensive line room. So, but I agree with you, Brett. I think wide receiver. I mean, look, I don't. That's the thing. There really aren't a ton of snaps to go around for freshmen. I'm going to say Elijah Burris. He played well in the spring, particularly in the spring game. A lot of good feedback. 4-star, I believe he's a 4-star recruit. Not a high end 4-star, but I would say middle of the pack 4-star. So someone who's had a solid recruiting profile. Thing is, there's still a lot of guys ahead of him. So I can't see him passing guys like Malachi Fields or Greathouse or Faison or Pauling. But so far, he's been someone when he's gotten an opportunity, he's done well. So it's possible by the end of the year, if you have a couple injuries, maybe he can get in there a little bit and give us an extra element, give us a little spark in the offense.
How many times into the first NBC broadcast before we find out that Elijah Burris's dad is Plexico Burris, who plays in the NFL, and Jerome Bettis' son committed, and and Bryce Young's dad is an NFL Hall of Famer, Bryce Young of Notre Dame, not the former Alabama quarterback. Like there are so many sons of well-known, like Hall of Fame level. Maybe Plexico Burris isn't a Hall of Famer, but like.
Notable
All pro
receiver,
type guy,
yeah.
for sure notable on this roster. Like I'm giving it like 2 minutes into the second quarter. There's no way they make halftime without bringing it up.
It's a broadcaster's dream, right? If you're looking at talking
awesome.
points, we're going to hear it. Well, and I guess the question is like, are we going to like continue to, I think I'm going to continue to enjoy them talking about it, but I know, my friends who are maybe not Notre Dame fans, if they're watching the games, they'd be like, how many times are they going to mention this? They've mentioned it like literally every single game. But look, I think it's a credit to the staff. It's also like a great, part of the recruiting pitch. It's like, hey, look at these families, these NFL families who have, competed at the highest level. They've been through everything. They've been through like major college football. They've been through the top of the NFL world, and they're trusting Marcus Freeman and Notre Dame to take care of their sons. I think that says a lot. It tells you what Marcus Freeman's built. It tells you how much credibility he has. That families like this are totally bought into what he's building.
100%. So on the defensive side of the ball, I think there's a lot of choices here. I'm going with Madden Faraimo. We're going to have to, I don't think the pronunciation guide's out
Malort
yet.
shot.
So I might have that one wrong. Yeah, that could be our first Malort shot for new listeners to the show. Every single time one of us mispronounces a name, most often me, because if Mike doesn't know the name of someone, he just doesn't say it. And then leaves it to me to say
he'll lay traps sometimes. He'll be like, we should talk about this. And then it'll be my turn to talk about, I'll be like, this is an impossible name to pronounce. And you teed it up for me to pronounce it. So far, no traps.
Okay. Well, I possibly have one, but we'll see. Freshmen are tough, but Madden Faraimo, look, he's getting a lot of buzz as the next Manti Te'o. He was actually an early enrollee, so got to practice with the squad last year during the college football playoff run. And I remember during warmups, like watching him on the sideline go through drills for the Sugar Bowl, and I was like, dude, who is that beast? Like running linebackers. And I was like, oh, he's not even like technically on the roster yet. Is just allowed to practice. So top 100 recruit. Again, tough position group to break through. I think linebacker is one of our strongest position groups. But, if they find certain packages for him, like just an incredible athlete, and has now been getting a lot more practice time than other freshmen as that early enrollee. I think cornerback room, Cree Thomas, Dallas Golden, it's a position where Ben Morrison and Leonard Moore were both big contributors early on. Those two guys are blue chip recruits. I think with or without an injury, I wouldn't be surprised seeing one or both of those guys getting some reps, either from Christian Gray at the nickel, maybe in dime packages, but some really high-end talent that I think we can probably expect to see on the field this year.
Yeah. Those match exactly what I had, Brett. I had, Madden. I'm just going to pronounce it. To be clear, I'm pronouncing it how you pronounce it, so this doesn't count as a Malort shot.
Sure.
Faraimo. I think, look, everything you said is right, Brett. I think he's as good as our linebacker room is. it's possible with this guy that he may be too good to completely leave off the field. We'll see. It's a very loaded linebacker room, but this is a guy who looks special. And then I agree on the corners. Apparently, through the first couple practices, Cree Thomas, Dallas Golden, Mark Zachary, apparently they've been running with the varsity, so to speak. So they've been getting some meaningful reps, and they look like they belong. I think our frontline starters, Gray and Moore, look, I think that those guys are clearly the starters, and there's a drop off after them. But the depth there is that top line depth is a bit more limited. After that, I think Hobbs is probably the next person in. But you have someone get hurt. I think some of these freshmen, it's possible that they could be getting reps. So yeah, I totally agree with you on that.
One other name, just because I think it's an easier position situationally to get on the field as a freshman, is Chris Burgess, not to be confused with Elijah Burris, but Burgess with a G. Top 70 recruit. He's an edge rusher. So again, I think it's hard to ask those edge guys as freshmen to come in and read options, read different run schematics, but situationally on third down, is that guy gonna get on the field to just say, hey, pin your ears back and go after the quarterback? Yeah, I think you could see him get on the field as a really high motor and break into that deep defensive line rotation. So last segment, or topic of questions for today: new contributors that weren't big time contributors last year. So I'm gonna bifurcate a few things here. A guy like Bryce Young, who we all know he was blocking kicks and field goals. He got a lot of defensive reps down the stretch. A guy like Josh Burnham or Drake Bone, who maybe weren't day one starters, but clearly played a ton of football. Not those guys. Like guys that if you're just the regular Notre Dame fan, you did not hear their name really at all or in any meaningful way. Who are the big contributors? Every Notre Dame fan needs to know these guys' name now.
Yeah, so I'll start with the obvious one, and I think, look, honestly, you've probably, if you're a Notre Dame fan and you haven't heard about these guys, you've probably been living under a rock. But they are one of these people will be a new contributor, and that's from the QB competition. So either CJ Carr, Kenny Minchie. We're going to talk about it a lot more in the offensive preview, but so far it sounds like this QB competition is much more neck and neck than I think a lot of people were anticipating. I think a lot of people expected Carr to just essentially just be, anointed the heir apparent. And so far it sounds like it's a lot more 50-50. So aside from that, the other person I want to name here is Eli Raridan at tight end, if he can stay healthy, because that's always been the problem with him. When he's healthy, he has the profile of a potentially impactful tight end. I saw some comparisons to Kyle Rudolph. Obviously that's a high case, if you could approach anything close to that. But when he's healthy, he's someone who I think certainly has the skill set to be able to continue that lineage of great Notre Dame tight ends. Great's maybe a strong word here, but extremely strong play at that position. I think one thing to note here is for Notre Dame, when they have their summer media circuit in New York, typically they bring along like bona fide stars, guys that it's like. For this topic, Brett, you're asking about people that fans wouldn't know. You're not bringing people like that. You're bringing like Jeremiah Love. You're bringing like star players that everyone knows about. Interestingly, Eli Raridan, he was brought along on the media circuit in New York City. So I think if you're reading the tea leaves a little bit, maybe the staff knows something here. If he can stay healthy, maybe they feel like they have an asset at tight end, someone who could really step up and be a surprise, someone who. We haven't seen a ton of production from so far. And again, it's if he stays healthy, it's not, again, the thing with him is he's always been injury prone. So someone who's finally not injury prone, they can have a clean season, step up their play dramatically. Not a crazy scenario. So that's, for me, that's the guy on offense that I would keep an eye on.
Yeah, and Raridan's interesting too. I mean, he was as highly touted as like Mike Mayer level, Kyle Rudolph level recruit. Tore his ACL senior year playing basketball. Freshman year at Notre Dame, same thing, tore it. And the doctors have all said, though, it's not like it was a re-tear. Like he tore kind of a different part of the ACL, just fluke. And so from that perspective, last year was really kind of his first year, like really getting his legs back under him after not really being in competitive sports for better part of 2 years. It sounds like all of the reports is like, okay, he trusts it now. He's back. He like that just takes time when you're out that long as an athlete. Felt like last year's a little bit more about finding himself. Hopefully this year's a breakout. I think my answer goes to whoever fills in for Charles Jagasa on the offensive line. As we mentioned, unfortunate kids do not drive ATVs in the offseason. Jagasa breaks his arm in a four-wheeler accident. Really unfortunate news, especially after he went down with a torn pec last year and really missed all the season until the playoff run. I think that job is probably Absher Sullivan. They could reshuffle the line and Gerby Lambert could start a tackle and then, move someone like Anthony Knapp to the inside. But there's going to be a fifth offensive lineman, at least for the first half of the season. And it's such a front-loaded schedule with Miami and Texas A&M out of the gate. That fifth offensive lineman is going to be, I think, really critical to Notre Dame's success early on. So I think that's my answer. Everyone knows about CJ Carr, Kenny Minchie. Be on the lookout for Absher Sullivan or Gerby Lambert. I think most likely to take that fifth starting spot, at least to start the year on the offensive line. On defense, we mentioned, replacing Xavier Watts is going to be big shoes to fill. It's Luke Talich or Tay Johnson or Jalen Stroman. Those are the three guys. We'll see how that shakes out. On the rest of defense, everyone's going to know these players because with the injuries and also the depth that Al Golden went with, even when guys were healthy, there were so many key contributors. It was one of the things we talked about all the time last year of like, we could never pick who was the best player on defense in any game because there were 5, 6, 10, 20 guys making plays. That means that you're going to see a lot of familiar faces, but it's that safety spot. Really curious to see who holds down that role. And it's interesting. We don't talk about this enough, but returning production used to be the stat to talk about in the offseason. How many starters did you have back? Well, Notre Dame's losing, I guess, 6 starters on defense, but Ben Morrison wasn't really a starter the second half of the year. Xavier Watts for sure was. Riley Mills and Howard Cross, we played the biggest moments of the season, oftentimes without those two guys on the field. And RJ Oben, yeah, he started, but again, I think there were probably 3 or 4 better edge rushers than RJ Oben last year. And so returning production now is such a, sure, we lost Sam Hartman, but you brought in Riley Leonard. Wasn't Riley Leonard returning football production? How do you count transfers? And so we haven't mentioned returning production really once as a stat or as a metric to even really try to track. It's kind of not in vogue anymore just in college football circles because it's so hard to benchmark. And I think on defense, that's especially true. You have a ton of guys coming back that maybe they weren't the starter, maybe they weren't the starter week 1, but at some point in that season was playing significant chunks of football. And now they're just evolving into a slightly bigger role. I think that helps with the reload mentality here for Notre Dame going into 2025.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think it's a challenge for a lot of people who make the advanced stats. Like Bill Connolly's talked about that. He's still continuing to tweak, his formula for SP Plus for the transfer portal. It's just a huge wrench in the system. And, I think it's like the level of impact you can have with the transfer portal, for instance, it can be pretty massive in some cases. Like entire rosters are overhauled and it becomes very, very difficult to project that. So yeah, I mean, I'm with you, Brett. I think it's funny how as times change, like the metrics that we focus on also change. But yeah, I'll just kind of reiterate that, Brett and I, it's important to us to lean into the analytics and lean into, insights from that. But it's also important to change the way that we think about things. So you don't want to necessarily lean on the same metrics if they're kind of stale, if they no longer are applicable to the situation at large. So in many ways, I would say we're trying to reflect our approach to how Marcus Freeman, approaches his program to the modern college football landscape. You got to be adaptable. You got to be willing to, kind of roll with the punches. And that's exactly our approach too. And I think, if you don't do that, you're gonna certainly miss some insights, and you're not going to be able to, have as strong of a grasp of the team and college football as a whole.
Absolutely. The other 2 names, just to round out one more topic, 2 names on my mind that we haven't talked about on this show that would fall into the new contributor bucket. One of these definitely has an asterisk. Tyler Buckner is officially back in the quarterback room. If folks remember, he went to Alabama, he came back, joined the lacrosse team, joined as a running back. He is likely QB3 in that quarterback room. And I've been saying it for years, Mike. I am so hopeful we put Tyler Buckner in at running back with Jeremiah Love at running back, two running backs in the backfield, with CJ Carr or Kenny Minchie at quarterback, and just have like the ultimate set of two guys can run, three guys can run it, two guys can pass it, like have someone, go 50 yards now, just like the ultimate like trick play playbook. I think there could be some really cool wrinkles for Tyler Buckner. And I have this conspiracy. This is unfounded. There's no source for this. I have this conspiracy that we spent all of last year putting Tyler Buckner in the running back room so that we could set up, okay, now he knows both how to play running back and quarterback. And now we're just going to have trick play packages with Buckner in like a two running back look. I've dreamt for this. I like have sleepless nights thinking about all of the fun that Denbrock could have with this, and might not ever happen. But when it does, you heard it here first on Gyrish Talk. I've got Tyler Buckner as like my everyone should know this is coming moment.
Well, at a minimum, apparently I think he's been working in as like the holder for field goals. So at a minimum, like that would suggest some trickery, on a fake field goal. So we'll see. I mean, look, this staff has proven themselves to be very creative with the trick plays. So I wouldn't put anything past them. For me, I would find it entertaining. Actually, maybe this wouldn't be entertaining, but this would just mirror one of my favorite TV shows of all time, Friday Night Lights. One of the characters in that show, the quarterback, Matt Saracen, kind of, becomes the starting quarterback at one point, becomes replaced, by the next new thing. Ends up going to the wide receiver room. So maybe not running back, but the wide receiver room, and then ends up getting the job back and, playing well. So, maybe that's a lot of crazy things would have to happen, but maybe cool. Tyler Buckner's or Matt Saracen, maybe at the end of the year, we're like, okay, hey, he's back. He's got the starting job. He just just led us to a national championship. Very unlikely.
That'd be quite the storyline.
Hey, look, I'm Friday Night Lights can't script it up any better than Hollywood, right? So, maybe Notre Dame could make an attempt, but yeah, great call out. I think one person I want to call out here is Micah Gilbert, because this is a person who last year before he got hurt, he was part of a wide receiving class who I believe included Cam Williams. And Cam Williams was a top 50 overall recruit, big time wide receiver commit, the type of guy that we hadn't typically gotten in recruiting up to that point. So he's a little overshadowed, but Gilbert was a 4-star, had a 4-star profile, and by all accounts was very ahead of schedule. Looked like he was someone who was going to find his way onto the field. Got hurt, unfortunately, and so that killed his progress, but he's healthy now. And I think he's someone to keep an eye on because, look, I think we have a clear top 3 in my mind in the wide receiver room, and I think that's Fields. I think that's it's Fields, it's Greathouse, and it's Faison. And then after that, maybe it's Pauling, right, at number 4. But Gilbert, I think he's someone who, if he picks up where he left off, maybe he has a shot at grabbing that 4th or 5th wide receiver spot. So someone to just call out and I would say like just monitor as we get more into the season.
Absolutely. Well, with that, episode 1 is in the books. Gyrish Nation, we will be back to go even deeper on the offensive depth chart in our next show. Thanks for listening. Gyrish.